Guys, just get the A6700. This ain't not having IBIS is too much of a deal breaker. Not enough here for me to part way with my not worth the upgrade for me. No IBIS definitely not worth the price tag in my opinion. This camera was very disappointing. So Sony just announced the new release of the ZV-E10 Mark II. As somebody who uses the FX30 and the A6700 as my primary cameras, I figured who better to talk about the new ZV-E10. So quick lesson if you didn't know, Sony likes to put their cameras in different categories. The S/FX line are video focused cameras. This means they have things like shutter angle, a crazy high ISO performance, a built-in cooling system so that you can have longer record sessions, and some of those cameras even have internal ND filters. Then you have their R lineup of cameras, which are photography focused cameras. You get more megapixels, a better autofocusing system, and just things that make photography a lot easier to shoot. Then you have their A7/A6 line. These cameras are for the hybrid shooters. They have good photo specs and good video specs. You won't get the ability to shoot at 12,800 ISO and still get a clean image like you do with the FX/S series, and you won't get a crazy 61 megapixel sensor like you do with the R series. But you will get a 33 megapixel sensor and the ability to shoot at 3200 ISO. And then that leaves us with the Z line of cameras. These cameras are targeted towards content creators and people who are new to cameras. And what these people are looking for is a camera that's small and compact, has really good video specs, a really good autofocus system because 9 times out of 10 they're filming by themselves, a good flip out LCD screen so that they can see themselves, and it can't be too expensive because these cameras are targeted towards beginners. So now that we have a better understanding of what certain cameras are used for and who they're marketed towards, let's give the ZV-E10 Mark II a fair review. So let's jump into the specs of this camera. It has a 26 megapixel APS-C sensor, the same sensor that you see in the FX30 and the A6700. It has the flip out screen that all content creators love. It uses the larger NPF Z100 battery. It has a zoom rocker on the top just like the FX30. It has one card slot, a micro HDMI port. It takes USB-C, which can be used for streaming, and you get all of this in a camera that weighs a little over half a pound. Now I don't want you to think that I'm just sticking up for the ZV-E10 Mark II because I'm just a big Sony fanboy and Sony can do no wrong. We're definitely going to talk about its lack of IBIS, the overheating issue, and the fact that it doesn't have the new AI chip. But just because a camera doesn't have those things, I don't think that makes it a bad camera. Just think about it. We're talking about a camera that can shoot 4K up to 60 frames per second, 422 10-bit, and it costs less than $1,000. If I would have read those specs just 2 years ago, people on the internet would have lost their minds. Just 2 years ago, the only prosumer cameras that Sony had out that can record 4K up to 60 frames per second in 10-bit 422 was the A7 IV, the A7S III, and the FX3. And if I'm not mistaken, the A7 IV cost $2,500, the A7S III cost $3,500, and the FX3 cost $4,000. And you can argue, we're in 2024, we have cameras like the A6700, it can shoot 120 frames per second, it has IBIS, and it has the new AI chip. And to that I say, you're absolutely right. If you value those features so much, by all means, pick up the A6700. It's a great camera. It's so great, in fact, that it's the camera I'm using to record this video right now. But if I was using the new ZV-E10 Mark II, you would not be able to tell the difference. Because this is the setting that most people are going to be using the camera in. A room with air conditioning, and the camera is set on a tripod. And with that $400 in savings, I could pick up a V90 SD card and the Sigma 16mm f1.4. That sounds like a pretty good deal to me. But I know people still have their gripes with this camera, and for good reason. Now we're gonna go over the cons of the new ZV-E10 Mark II. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. The overheating issue. Based on Gerald Undon's test, if you're filming 4K 24 frames per second in a temperature controlled environment, you're good. The camera will die before it overheats. Now let's say it's a nice day out and you decide you want to film a video outside. When Gerald ran his test outside in direct sunlight on a day that was 73 degrees, it cut the record time in half, which, don't get me wrong, That's terrible. But when Gerald ran the test again and put the camera in the shade on an 80-degree day, the battery died before the camera overheated, which tells me it's not really the temperature of the space, but it's more so the direct sunlight hitting the camera. Now let's jump to 60 frames per second. In the ideal scenario, Gerald ran the test and he got 24 minutes of 4K 60 before the camera overheated. Outside on an 80-degree day in direct sunlight, you'll get 11 minutes worth of record time. And if you throw the camera in the shade, you'll get 15 minutes. Now those times sound terrible, and they are. But me personally, I've never found myself in a situation where I'm recording 4K 60 for more than a minute at a time. But that's just me. Your field of work may require something different, and if that's the case, then I recommend the FX30 over the ZV-E10. But for most shooting scenarios, while yes, it is still an issue, I don't think it's as big of an issue as people make it out to be. Now let's move on to the IBIS situation of this camera. It does not have IBIS, but what it does have is an active stabilization mode. And what that does is it crops into your image 1.5 times and it digitally stabilizes your footage, which I completely understand if you don't want to crop into your image, especially 1.5 times. Another alternative to IBIS is to grab a gimbal. A gimbal will work 1,000 times better than IBIS ever will. And since this camera is $400 cheaper than the A6700, you can put that money towards a gimbal and still have some money left over. But I understand that some people don't want to crop into their image or have to lug around a gimbal with them just to get stable footage. And if you're one of those people, then I say it's best if you just go up to the A6700. Like I said, most people are going to be using their camera in a scenario like this, where they're sitting down talking in front of the camera, or they have somebody else sitting in front of the camera and they're directing. Either way, the camera's gonna be on a tripod. So while not having IBIS definitely does suck, I think for most people in their use cases, and definitely for me in my use case, if I want stable footage, I'm not really looking for IBIS. I'll probably just end up grabbing my gimbal. So for that reason, me personally, I don't think not having IBIS is a deal breaker. And then this is the last thing that I've really heard a lot of people say about this camera, is the fact that it doesn't have the new AI chip. And if it doesn't have the new AI chip, then it's not worth buying. But what I don't think those people understand is that the new AI autofocusing chip is still relatively new. Cameras like the A7 IV, the A7S III, and the FX3 don't have that AI chip, and I've never heard people complain about their autofocusing systems. So yes, while the ZV-E10 Mark II doesn't have the latest and greatest technology, it still has some really good tech inside of it. So that's my take on the ZV-E10 Mark II. It's a bang for your buck camera in my opinion. Like I said before, for less than $1,000, you get a camera that shoots 4K up to 60 frames per second in 10-bit 422. I just don't want people thinking the new ZV-E10 Mark II is a bad camera. But that's all I gotta say. If you disagree with me, we can debate in the comments below. Other than that, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button for me. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.